This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vodori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vodori's Amend and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Annalise, and today's conversation is going to be about all things audits. So everything from common pitfalls during audits, things you can do when responding to an audit, all the way to thinking a little bit more about audit preparedness and audit readiness. To provide some expertise and perspective on this topic today, I'm joined by Dr. Joe DiCapite, Director of Strategy for the UK and Europe at Vodori. Joe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for the show. Thanks for the introduction. I can't promise that I'm going to bring tons of expertise. I do have some experience in the matters.
Perfect.
And some opinions. So I'll make sure I share those.
Good deal. That sounds perfect. And before we dig into it, I had this strange thing happen to me today. So in my role at Vodori, I hear about audits. I've written about them. We talk about them, just based on my role, I am exposed, but I've never been through one. And, you and I have been preparing for this conversation. We've been talking about audits a lot in the past couple of days. And so literally part of my morning routine is I sit down and I play Wordle. Do you play the New York Times game Wordle?
I do know Wordle, yes. I try to kick that habit, but I do know it, and it's very addictive. And now I don't get back into it.
Literally audits were, I think, subconsciously on my mind so much this week that my opening word, which was audit this morning. That's what I put into Wordle this morning to start my game, which is very unlike me. Normally I start with the same word every day. So clearly audit's on the brain, and excited to just dig into this conversation with you today so that, we can just bring these excellent best practices to the audience. But yeah, that's the first time that's happened to me, is to have a work-related word start my Wordle game.
It's something you get used to, I would say, working in life science companies. Suddenly, that specter of audit comes down on you, and then all you see is audit. Audit is everywhere. And they are one of those things that come along like buses as well. Suddenly, you've not had audits for a long period, and then everywhere you look, there are audits. And this is when I say that I don't have expertise, but I've got experience of these.
Yes.
I've been in this situation several times where you can be going along through the year, everything's looking good, and then suddenly they all just seem to hit at once. You've kind of known that some of them are coming, but then you just suddenly get kind of swamped by them. So maybe that experience you've had today with audits suddenly coming to front of mind, and then they appear everywhere. Maybe that's actually exactly the right experience of how audits do happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that buses analogy, again, as we were sort of preparing for this conversation, as someone who hasn't gone through that experience, it helped me understand someone's mentality and a bit about, the uncertainty that can come with audits of it might be a year and I don't see one come through, or it might be that all of a sudden I've got back to back, or they're in, quick succession just because of schedules and how things work out. So I think today's conversation just around audit readiness is going to be super helpful for those so that they are prepared should they need to get on the bus once a year or perhaps 3 times, within a given period. So let's talk, you said you're going to draw on some of your experience with audits. Talk a little bit about the types of audits you've been through, just what is your experience with them, just because we are going to be drawing from today's conversation.
Yes, I was thinking about this. The experiences that I'll be drawing upon, the majority will be coming from audits that I've been through myself. But in the rock and roll circles that I hang out in, we do talk about audits at times. So some of my experiences will come from picking the brains of friends who go through this as well. And some of it's also from audit training, making sure that that the teams going through it are prepared. So my experience about going through these is always from the brand team side. So within pharma, that's been from within Med Affairs, from leading Med Affairs groups, also from marketing and leading commercial teams. So I've kind of come at them from different perspectives. Sometimes I've been responsible for elements of the audit. Sometimes I'm simply looking to make sure that we support the audits that might be happening in the peripheral side of the business. But in general, I would say I think of audits in in a few different categories. There are the internal audits that I've been through. Now, the internal audits might be things that you're going through as kind of standard procedures within the company to make sure all of your processes, procedures are in a good shape. Sometimes there might be internal audits being run by a department that is very peripheral to your department. They may have a responsibility to run these processes. So although there are internal audits, they feel a bit more serious than kind of the ones that you might do within your own team and within your own department. Then you've got external audits from maybe business partners. So if you're in a company that partners with, if you in-license or commercialize another company's products, then it's absolutely standard that you would audit one another's processes to make sure that you're putting the responsibility of your brand maybe in their hands or vice versa. And so there may be those types of audits. And then the ones that kind of really make you sweat and kind of make you worry are the regulatory audits. So the ones, they might be from the health authority in the UK. It might be one that's being done by the prescriptions of the PMCPA, so the group that monitor how prescription medicines are promoted. So depending the category of audit that we're talking about can have a big impact on how stressed you feel about them. But they're generally the audits that I've been through that I'll be drawing on my own experiences or where I've asked friends about how they have experienced going through audits.
Okay, good deal. No, that's helpful just to sort of set the stage there and contextualize sort of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So let's start with common pitfalls. What can go wrong during an audit, whether that's an internal one or one from a regulatory body?
Things start off in a bad place if one of the early things that will happen is you're requested to find a certain cohort of documents. That might be all of a certain group of documents approved within a certain period. It might be processes. The first thing that just starts you off on the wrong foot is not being able to find a full cohort of the materials that you've been requested. That immediately just shows that things maybe aren't as in hand as they should be. If that happens, then immediately from day one, the auditor will be probing to see where those challenges and why you're not able to do it. So that's probably an area where things go wrong. I would also go a bit more macro. I think one of the big challenges of an audit is if from day one they're seen as adversarial. If you go into an audit thinking that the auditor is there as the police and that you are up against them as almost as an enemy, that's a problem because audits are there to protect our industry and the work that we do. We don't sell kind of consumer goods. We sell healthcare goods, prescription medicines. Like these are important things that alter and save people's lives. It's appropriate that we are audited and our processes are able to kind of to stand up to a test. So that's another area I think that where things go bad. If you start with the wrong attitude as to what the audit is for, it's not going to go well. So that's one of the tips I would say. Just remember the auditors are there to do their job. You're there to do your own job. But ultimately there is a shared outcome that we're looking for, which is to make sure that life science activities are following the regulations that we all hope we would receive when we need to use these types of products.
Mm-hmm. And going in with that mentality of on the same team versus adversarial, I think just helps all around in how you're responding to requests, talking, interacting with that person. I can see that really making a difference in the total experience. So, okay, so we've talked about,
It is hard though, because the nature of it is that if you're in the company being audited, it is your own processes and your actions that are being scrutinized, and so it's hard not to feel it's hard not to feel kind of that you're under personal scrutiny. But if you can pull yourself back from that and remember there's purpose to what's being done, it's a way for process improvement, and I think it can just help with that attitude going into it.
Okay, so pitfalls include inability to find documents when they're requested, perhaps an adversarial relationship with the auditor. What else? What else from your perspective is a common pitfall or things that folks can look out for?
Probably the areas that are the most challenging Mainly because probably I've worked in big organizations where we've always had pretty good documentation on all of the things you would expect, or you have an expectation to be in a good way. So I have most experience of promotional materials being audited and being looked over. And they typically are always in a very good place. I've always been lucky to have specialist software where all of those materials are kept.
Yeah.
The pitfalls come when the auditor wants to know about decision making. And if there is a specific decision that's been made about a brand or about a business process, and ordinarily these are probably the things that don't get documented quite as well. The decisions that have been made maybe several months ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and you don't know the team members that made the decision. If that decision-making process hasn't been documented, that's kind of one of the other pitfalls, I would say. Now, above all of this, the pitfalls of going into an audit where things go badly is when you just haven't prepared. Kind of maybe if you've taken the audit lightly, if you've come into the audit just wanting to get through it without any kind of major findings, maybe that's the wrong attitude, and that means you go into it not having done the preparedness that you should have done. So if you don't prepare and you don't look at this as an opportunity to kind of scrutinize your own activities and to scrutinize or to look for those opportunities to improve your own processes, then I think you can take it too lightly and not give it kind of the respect, the reverence that they can have and should have. So that's probably one of the other pitfalls.
The rigor and preparedness is not where it needs to be. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Well, on that note, let's pivot to preparedness. So, what are some things, you're in an audit. These are some of the pitfalls to look out for. What are some more forward-facing strategies or best practices that you have used or, you've heard of through, your colleagues or friends? What are some ways that companies can prepare for audits or sort of, to harken back to the bus analogy, be ready no matter when the bus arrives at the station? What are some audit preparedness things to consider?
It's a good mindset to be in that you don't know when an audit's going to drop. So as a way of working, just imagine that an audit could come around could arrive next week. I think that's a good mindset to be in because it means that you constantly follow the good practices that are going to be critical to getting through an audit effectively. I've always worked in the UK market. I've spent some time in global markets, but there are markets where it's much more common to have the auditor kind of arrive at your door and suddenly you don't know that you're going to be audited. So in those markets, for absolute certain, behave as if you're going to be audited at any point and that you know that you need to have everything in order. So that's probably the first top tip. The second is be prepared. Well, don't take every audit the same. You need to make sure that you don't absolutely kind of divert all business practices towards getting those audits right. They can go alongside. However, my experience is if you know you're about to have a health authority audit, that's going to be a critical activity for that business, probably in the for that 3 to 4 year business cycle. So that one's going to take more activity. And for that, I would say prepare for it. Take external advice on how to get through an audit effectively. I've seen these like the nerve centers that get put in some companies where one room just becomes the central hub where the audit team the internal audit team who's going to manage that from a company perspective, they'll all be together in that same room. And really their objective is to make everything run as smoothly as possible. If a document is requested, that document is found quickly. If a decision-making process is questioned, the team can quickly pull that together. So this is where I would say, be prepared, put a team together to really manage that process if needed. Undertake training. There are behaviors that you need to drill into people within an audit that kind of buck the trend slightly of how you normally go about interacting with people. This may sound a bit counter to what I was saying about understanding that the auditors and you are both there to do essentially the same thing to protect the
Sure.
industry we work in. However, it's probably a truth, something that will be drilled into everyone that's been through audits. And the top tip going in is, when you're asked a question in an audit, imagine you're in an exam. Make sure your first question should be clarifying what the question you've been asked is, so that you really do understand the information that's being requested of you. Then provide the response to the question. Go against all the other British nature things you might have, or just not just Britishism, but we all like to engage
personality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
In an audit, you're not there to make friends with the auditor. Give them the information they need, and then stop talking. I think I shared, I think in preparation for this, Annalise, we talked about that example from The Great Escape, where the British inmate they'd escaped from the prisoner of war camp. They were getting on the bus, and the German officers got them by saying "good luck," to which the British escapees responded with "thank you," and then just gave themselves up, because it suddenly became they weren't who they were pretending to be. You've just got to buck that thing where you want to be as polite and kind of interactive as possible. Audits are not the time for that. Audits are the time to ask the question that you need to answer, and answer it as succinctly as possible, without being rude, and all those things that hopefully are drilled into us anyway. But that's another one of the things that you'll have drilled into you if you go through an audit yourself.
Yes, answer only what is asked, which I imagine, to your point, depending on just your personality type, that could be something that you need to sort of have in the back of your mind during the process of just like a different type of interacting with the auditor, right? I think, you talked about
I was just going to totally mischaracterize the different types of people that go through audits, but in my experience, the medical folk find it a bit easier. You get asked a question, fine, I'll just answer the question and then stop talking. Again, maybe a mischaracterization, but marketing colleagues who have often come through a sales background and are much more have those interpersonal skills, they will be looking to build relationships in every conversation they have. And so going into the audit, you want to drill into your marketing team. Remember, you're there to do a job, and they're there to do a job, but no one's there to make friends.
Yeah, I certainly would need that reminder. That's my personality type, so that resonates with me for sure. I think, you talked about it in the context of a pitfall, but obviously the sort of being fully electronic if possible, and that record of decision making, I imagine, is also some like a more ongoing care and feeding activity that would contribute to being prepared for an audit should it come, and making the response easier as well, right? Just sort of that ongoing culture of compliance, incorporating that into the organization, you imagine, just makes the whole audit response process easier.
Yeah, I've only ever been through audits where I've had the benefit of having specialist software where all of the documents that they're requesting live somewhere. It's still the case that not everybody in our industry is lucky enough to work in companies that have identified the need for that type of software, or identified the budget for that software. Companies that are still using paper-based processes to manage certain decision-making and promotional materials, for example, it is a struggle. Like I know through speaking to friends who work in those companies, I think the anxiety of an audit there is particularly large. I don't think anyone really feels that they are audit ready. Like if an audit dropped the next week, I think everyone kind of slightly worries about just how prepared they would be for that situation.
Well, I think the other, advantage of having all of this electronically captured is you talked a little bit about the audit readiness team, and certainly we've heard that sometimes those teams are quite large, and it takes days, a lot of time and resources from teams to respond to the audits. By having some of these things electronically captured, by digitizing some of the information, you can only imagine not only does it take fewer hours potentially to respond to the audit, but protects other members of your team from having to be drop their workload and things that they're doing to focus on the audit. So there's, preparedness advantages, resource and time advantages. The snowball effect starts to happen as you start to think about all the benefits of having these things electronically captured.
Yeah, for sure. And there's been one particular situation I've been in where it was a decision that was about a kind of a more general promotional approach that was being scrutinized and questioned. And it just so happened that was one of the decisions that hadn't been captured well in the minutes of the brand team meeting. And it's probably the area of a lot of companies, no matter the size, no matter the software support that you've got, decisions sometimes are made in forums where actually there is not such good note-taking or capturing of minutes and decisions. My big learn of that has always been make those big decisions make the big decisions about your brands and the activities that you do them in bona fide meetings, capture them. If it was a decision that was maybe captured in an off-grid meeting, make sure that in your next official meeting, you just bring that decision back to light, capture it in the minutes, so that if ever you're in the situation where, and I've unfortunately been in this situation, you have a regulator saying, show me how this decision was made. You've got the documentation to back you up. It's one of the areas that I'm trying to think if I've ever been in a situation where that is really, I have been in fact, I have been in brand teams and business units where there has been really, really top-notch management of those types of minutes, and it is really important. And it really helps you as a team as well. It helps you stop having to go over decision-making processes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as you were talking too, it's like an operational backbone to just like, this is the way of working so that we're all always audit ready, but also making it easy for people to do the compliant thing. If I'm trying to drink more water and I put a full water bottle on my desk, I'm going to drink more water. It's like, what are sort of the cultural norms or the operational things we can put into practice so that it's really easy for people to do the thing that ensures that the company is audit ready, which probably an episode for a different day, but I think that's sort of a good underbelly to all of this is make it easy to stay compliant and to make sure that you're keeping record of the things that are required for the audit.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I've not touched on yet, but I think is one of the big differentiators between teams that I've been in that remain flexible enough that despite having very strict SOPs and very strict record keeping, they remain agile and flexible enough, and that's a good deviation process. So just because you've got processes in place, that doesn't mean that you can never stray away from those. There are always those business situations that aren't accounted for in your documentation or where you need to divert from that. Have a straightforward but kind of predefined deviation process so that when you need to make decisions like business decisions that aren't well accounted for in your SOPs or where you have to do something that's slightly against the norm, that's fine. There's a deviation process in place. You can document it. And then when the auditors need to look at anything and it may look like you're doing something slightly different, that's fine. You've got the deviation documents in place. And that kind of alludes to one other thing that companies sometimes forget about audits. You can focus all of your time on making sure you follow the regulations of the industry that you work in, which is a must. It's kind of the absolute standard. But there are also, you have your own company SOPs that you need to be following. And these SOPs may be above and beyond what's necessary of the working in the industry that you're in. But if you're found in breach of your own SOPs, it all starts to ladder up to this picture of you are not maintaining high standards. Your general processes may not be as good as they can be. And I would say that certainly comes in, that's one of those things within internal audits. It's always worth making sure that you spend the time looking at deviations from your own SOPs, not just deviations from kind of the laws and regulations that are handed down to you from the authorities.
Super helpful. Well, I feel like we could go on and on. There's always so much to talk about, but I think this is a great sort of end for the conversation today. And, especially what we always try to do on Amend and Progress is really provide that actionable insights or, best practices for organizations to start implementing. And I think we've certainly provided a lot for people to chew on, which is awesome. Joe, outside of the podcast, where can folks find you to engage with you?
Oh, if anyone wants to talk to me about audit, they can find me on LinkedIn. I would love to talk to them about it. That may sound facetious, but it's not. I do actually enjoy talking about these stuff. It's sometimes nice to talk to people and lick your wounds about experiences that you've had going through audit. So, yep, find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to respond to people that may have views. Like I say, I'm mainly sharing my experiences of going through audits and having led teams through them. I've never been the named individual having to coordinate an entire company process through it, but I've been through enough of them that I would hope I've got something to add to a discussion about them. So yeah, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and I'll do my best to reply.
Yes, find Joe for your audit camaraderie needs on LinkedIn. What's the call there? And for those listening, the journey does not end here. Please follow Vodori on LinkedIn for just updates, upcoming content that we're going to be sharing, and any thoughts on today's episode. And if you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Until next time, this is Annalise signing off for Amend and Progress. Have a fantastic day.